Hey everyone, and welcome to this video. I'm Glenn, and this is episode 20 of the Oathsworn painting series. In this episode, I'm painting another Scar tribe. If you're new to miniature painting, I hope you'll find this video interesting and helpful. If you enjoy the painting guides, please hit the like button and leave a comment. Before painting the miniatures, I removed all the mold lines, filled the gaps and cleaned them. Then I made the centerfold prime by priming the models black and then applying a white primer from above, slightly angled. And here are all the paints I used for this painting guide. With that aside, let's begin. For the base coat on the bases, I used the speed paints shown on the banners, applying them randomly and blending them together. Next, I base coat the models primarily with speed paints using the colors shown on the banners. I start with the skin using Buckman's Glow, the only non-speed paint color. After applying Buckman's Glow to all the skin, I gave it a coat of Crusader Skin speed paint. Next, I use a mix of 2 parts brown and 3 parts grey on the leather parts, including the cloaks and bindings. I don't worry too much about precision going over the bone parts attached to the leather. These parts will be corrected in the layering phase. Then I apply beige to all bone and fur parts, except the bone parts covered by the leather color. Now I use brown on the wood parts. For the Bone Maiden's trousers, I mix brown and beige directly on the model. For the metal parts, I use a mix of 2 parts grey and 3 parts purple, and blend in turquoise directly on the models. For the chieftain's beard, I apply a thin coat of this purple mix. I paint the female's hair orange. With the first coat dry, I apply a second coat, starting with brown on the leg and arm guards. Next, I use a mix of 1 part purple and 1 part speed paint medium to add variation to selected leather areas. This includes the leather on the shaman, the maiden's chest piece, and the loincloth on all the models. The cloaks on the chieftain and shaman don't receive a second coat of speed paint. I also cover the handles on the male's weapons. Then I use beige, green and orange on the bone parts, blending them directly on the models. I skip the areas already painted with the leather mix. And I don't worry too much about precision here either, as I will refine this in the layering phase. I use the same process on the mantles and other fur parts. Now I go over the metal parts again with the same purple-grey mix, including touches of turquoise. And for good measure, I apply a second layer of brown to the wood parts. With the base coat complete, the models look something like this. Here, some of the maiden's bone parts have received further layers of paint. And here I have tested the color scheme on one of the models. Now let's move on to the layering phase. I start with the bone parts using the colors on the banners. I gradually highlight with the 3 colors while keeping some of the green and orange underpainting for a more interesting appearance. As I move through the layers, I push them further towards the exposed areas and edges. If I come across bone areas without orange or green hues, I randomly apply brown and green. Speed paints can also be used again in this stage. Here I corrected and repainted some of the bone parts on a bone white base coat. For the fur, I used the colors on the banners. I begin with the mantles, applying a thin grey tone to blend the colors. Next, I gradually layer with mixed greys, increasing brightness as I build up the layers. I use Oathsworn Grey for the final highlight. For fur on arm guards, boots and similar areas, I use the same approach, but mainly highlight the edges without the blending. For the chieftain's cloak, I create spots of beige, grey and brown. I highlight the raised edges with bone white. Then I glazed with beige, grey and brown. Afterward, I refine the raised edges with bone white again. Before adding green and brown glazes. And as the final step on this cloak, I pick out some of the raised edges. After painting the cloak, I repainted all the bone parts using a process similar to the one shown previously. I started with a base coat of either steel leadened red or bone white. Then I added hues of green and orange before continuing with layering. This also applies to the bone parts attached to the leather parts. For the leather parts, I use the colors on the banners. I use a range of brown, orange and beige colors and gradually build up the layers. Here I begin to define the edges and add a bit of texture. Mistakes can be corrected with Rhinox hide, which also works well for shading when it's thinned down. I add texture to flat surfaces and edges with a bright orange mix, finishing with a highlight of beige. I used another leather recipe using the colors shown on the banners. This mix consists of purple and brown, gradually highlighted to create a worn look with random spots and stains. Now I switch to brown and beige, adding scratches and texture. To soften and blend, I apply a very thin coat of purple. And then refine the texture. For the Shaman's Cloak, I mix the two leather recipes. I apply them randomly using both techniques to create a more varied appearance. For the maiden's trousers, I start with a mix of purple and brown. For the midtones, I use scrofulous brown, then layer the exposed areas with scrag brown and Yukaru orange. And for the final touch, I add scratches with beige. For the wood parts on the maiden and shaman, I use the colors shown on the banners. I paint wood grain patterns using base and grey. Then I add a touch of green. And follow up with more wood grain details. On the shield, I apply a brown tone for a base layer. Then I use a brighter layer on the flat areas. And here I add a touch of green as well. Next I highlight the edges and finish with bone white. For the metal parts, I use the colors shown on the banners. I begin creating the focal point on the pauldron, starting with a mix of Talisman Teal and Dark Reaper. I have used Dark Reaper, Fenrisian Grey and Ulfern Grey for the non-metallic metal method before, and find these colors work well. In this process, I also introduced additional colors to help refine the transitions between the focal points and the dark areas, which I think worked great. I continue to build up the focal point using brighter tones. Next, I use a dark color to create shadows and contrast. Here I introduce base to further refine the focal point. then I apply another dark color, a deep brown, to enhance the shadows. For the transitions, I use this mix, which I think works very well. Now I go back again to the base color to define the focal points further. As you can see, I move back and forth between the colors, building up the contrast between the shadows and the focal points. I don't focus too much on seamless transitions. Instead, I go for a more scratchy appearance by using thin brushstrokes. Here I hit the edges with the final highlights. This technique is applied to all the metal parts. I don't overthink the placement of the focal points, I simply follow the rule of cool. On the weapons I follow a similar process, building up the focal points along the blade edges. Here I also use thin brushstrokes to create a scratchy appearance, allowing me to get things done quicker while still achieving a great look. I also introduce the teal shade on the armor and blades to create a nice gradient between the various transitions on the metal parts. This was mostly applied at random during the base coating phase, simply slapped on. And of course, this can also be added now, if desired, with a color similar to Talisman Teal. On the sides, I paint one half of the blade with a rusty appearance. I start with a brown base coat and refine the edge in the midsection. Next, I add a touch of Dark Reaper, followed by another brown to create rust spots. Then I highlight the edges and refine the blade. For the skin, I use the colors shown on the banners. I gradually build up the layers, moving each layer further toward the light source as I progress. Here I refined the scars using Bugman's Glow. Afterward, I add a bit of magenta, then highlight the scars with a light skin tone. Next, I apply a super thin glaze of magenta to add warmth towards the shadows. I also used another magenta color. I don't think there's much difference between the two in the end, but this one was applied towards the upper chest and the hands. I also experiment with a super thin layer of orange on the exposed areas, mainly on the chests on the two butchers. For the chieftain's head, I add stubble for extra detail. I mix blue into the skin tones to create a greyish color. Then I mix in more pale flesh for a brighter tone and apply it using the stippling technique. I highlight the beard with Oathsworn Grey and paint eyebrows. I painted the eyes by applying Oathsworn Grey in the eye sockets. Then I added the pupils and ensured they were properly aligned. Afterward, I used the skin tones to refine and narrow down the eye sockets, which help make the eyes look less crazy and cartoonish. For the female character's hair, I used tones of orange and beige. I also decided to add warpaints to the female characters, using a purple color on the shaman and a turquoise color on the maiden. I paint the bases as I have done in previous videos, using tones of green, yellow, brown and grey, along with any colors I see fit from the palette. For added details, I paint pink and turquoise dots to represent fungus or mushrooms. Then I went the 2 laps around the base rim with a black color. I attached tufts, leaves and flowers to all the bases using super glue. And as the final step, I applied Matt Varnish for a matte finish and to protect the paints. And with that, let's have a look at the final result.
Blood for blood. 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 Blood for blood.
Accursed creatures stand at our gates, and the Painting Chronicles Brotherhood stands at the ready to face this evil. Join our cause by subscribing, and we shall triumph together. Pillar and Path Brothers. Also like and comment.